This is A.P. Lynn, and we're just reviewing the House of Seven Gables. If you have your book, yes, I think we do have the same page numbers. That might be helpful. I never told, I had this information about the house. You know, the picture on your book is the House of the Seven Gables. It is in Salem, Massachusetts. The house that on the picture was built in 1668. And about 100 years later, 1782, 4 of those 7 gables were removed. And in 1851, Hawthorne wrote the book. He actually grew up in Salem near that house. So he knew the house, and so he picked the house. I don't think it had any of the story that he created. I don't think there was any truth to any of that. But that he was fascinated with that, may have been in it. And so I think that's interesting. The house inspired the book. I was reading this morning from the book of Isaiah, and I think the Lord appreciated this. Isaiah 62:4, and if you look online, you can see the quote. This is literally what I was reading this morning. I wasn't planning to read this. I just read it. It says, "You shall no more be termed forsaken, and your land shall no more be termed desolate. But you shall be called, my delight is in her, and your land married." You know what the Hebrew word for my delight is in her? Hephzibah. So this morning about 6:30, I'm reading about Hephzibah, and Beulah is probably a term for Beulah land. But this is her name is very ironic. We'll just start there. Something to note about the book. Her name is ironic because there is nothing delightful about her. Her life is not delightful. Her appearance is not delightful. She has no community. Even her own brother doesn't like her. And yet her name means my delight is in her. I think that's beautiful. It's an example. I really believe in reversals. And if you look at Scripture, God's always turning things upside down, and making the dry desert into a fountain of water. He's always turning things upside. The first shall be last, and all of that. Yes, sir.
What's the name mean?
That means my delight is in her. And as you know how the story ends, she actually it ends well for her. And nobody would have seen that coming. So I think that's beautiful. Chapter 15. I won't spend, we did talk some about this, but these are just a few points. There are more if you look at the notes online. But one of the points is, this is after Phoebe left. Notice a storm comes in. So there's an easterly storm that takes place over the next several days, and it ends after the judge is dead. The author makes a point that it ends. This is the scene where the judge comes and challenges. In fact, he refuses to leave, and Hephzibah actually allows him, although she can't find him, she allows him to see. She's going to let him see Clifford, and so she goes upstairs to look for him. This was a point I thought was interesting. It's on page 161. It pointed out that the judge didn't say specifically what he did. We learn later, but the judge had a reckless youth. He did one wrong thing, right? And I love this statement. The judge's class of people believe one wrong act should be balanced by a lifetime of good works. And that's most human beings believe that's how they're going to get to heaven. I'm a sinner, but I've actually done more good things. I'm pretty sure that I have. I'm pretty sure. Not absolutely sure, but I'm pretty sure when it comes to it, I'm good. I'll be let in. That's quite a way to live your life. But that's kind of the judge's attitude. He did one wrong thing. What was that one wrong thing? Of course, he did lots of wrong things. But what is the one wrong thing he did in his youth that we know of? Yes, sir.
He was looking through his uncle's papers. His uncle came in and he caused him to die.
That thing happens that happens to all the pension males. He chokes on his blood. He has maybe like a heart attack and he dies. So that was one wrong thing. He needed money for some reason. He was going to steal it. And then he purposely manipulates the circumstances for what reason? Yeah.
Doesn't he like Frank Clifford?
he frames, that's it. That's a great word. That's exactly what he does. He frames Clifford. That's more than one little thing, you know? I mean, that's a big thing. Plus, he's a terrible person. His heart's awful. But, and I pointed out that the judge set Clifford free. Now he's planning to put him back in an asylum. Yeah, the judge is doing to Clifford what the colonel did to Matthew Mull. Really? Right? Isn't that right? He wanted the house, he wanted the land, the colonel did, so he basically had Matthew Mull executed. He wants the deed, he wants the missing wealth, so he basically going to condemn Clifford to 30 more years in prison. So he's so, notice in the book how so much like the judge he really is. Well, I know this is important to you. Although I wouldn't know that by looking at you right now. I know somewhere in your heart this matters. All right. I thought this was fascinating, and it took the blessing of reading it multiple times. Before she goes up to get Clifford, she turns around and says, "What'd you say?" And I think he said nothing. He said one word or something. But what did she hear? What could she have heard, perhaps? She heard something. She turns around to the judge. Well, we don't have any idea, but you know what I think it was? I think it's that gurgle in his throat. I think he heard that. She heard that, sort of a premonition that he's gonna die. All right, so chapter 16, she goes up to find him. He's not there. Why are we going over this? Because when you answered whatever prompt I give you, you need to show an evidence of the entire book, not just 2 or 3 scenes, not just the first half, the middle half, or the last half. You need to have a kind of a comprehensive knowledge of the whole book, and you can pull those things out instead of giving yourself away. I've only read the last part, so that's all I can talk about. You don't want to give that impression. All right, so this is again another premonition. This is on page 168. Hepzibah could not rid herself of the sense of something unprecedented. That's the only part I wrote down. But something had happened. While she was looking for Clifford, she gets this feeling something like incredible has happened. Of course, we know what that was. What was it? What unprecedented thing had happened? What? He's dead. The guy's dead. She doesn't know that. And then that same scene, Clifford is standing there pointing to the body of the judge saying, "We can dance now, Hepzibah." And she still doesn't know what's going on. And then they leave the house. That's called Clifford's Chamber. Chapter 17, and here's another theme that we've talked about, which is what you should do before you write any paper about any book. You should review, what is this book about? What are the themes? It's called The Flight of Two Owls. And this is the renewal of community in their lives. They had been cut off from community. He'd been in jail for 30 years. That's not exactly like community. You're in a cell all by yourself. That's the opposite of community. She'd been in this house basically all by herself. She did she did rent one room out to Holgrave, but basically all her adult life, she's been stuck in this house. And now the doors open and they join. The rest of the book now is that renewal of community for these people. The living together as a family. That's kind of odd family. A brother and a sister, a cousin and her husband, and a neighbor, Uncle Venner. That's an odd family, but they are like a family. And so that's one thing that has been refreshed now that that the judge is dead, the curse is dead, that they can live life now. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but Clifford, he just keeps talking, and we may have mentioned this, but he basically comes to the conclusion that he says, we do not actually say, life is not a line, it's a circle. And this was the comment on page, I don't have a page, somewhere around page 180, 181. We do actually return to something long ago tried and abandoned, which we now find etherealized, refined, perfected to its ideal. basically his point was, we used to be nomads. That's his opinion. You know, human race was just moving around, didn't have big cities, and now we're not nomad. But now with the train, we can be nomads again. We went back and we took the best of the past, you know, being able to travel, and now we have a safe, quick way to do it, the train. Do you see the connection with the other themes in the book of like generational sin? Like they have to deal with that curse. Until they deal with it, their life is cursed. And basically he's saying you can't abandon the past. You got to go back and deal with it and move on. It's true for you, it's true for me. I really think that. So I think that's interesting, how that other sin, that other theme of the past and its importance. You can't just ignore it. The next book we read, that's a huge part of the story is your past. You better deal with it one way or the other. All right, so that generational sin has to be dealt with. The past has to be, you can't abandon it. You can't forget it. You have to deal with it and you can move on. And he even says you should cut, this sounds like a contradiction to that, but he agrees with Holgrave. Let's cut down the house. Let's break down the house. He's talking to this man. And Holgrave said that, and we know why. You know, but you can't break it down until you figure out what happened, you know. But he agrees that houses should be torn down because he's got one house in mind. He doesn't want to have anything ever to do with it. All right, chapter 18. We talked about this. This is mocking the judge. He's just sitting there, and the narrator is having a dialogue with this dead person, which is kind of interesting. Did you notice anything in that were interesting? One is that very day he had a doctor's report, and that's ironic. He knew something was wrong, so he was going to go see the doctor, but he just didn't get there soon enough. That's not, at least ironic. That had he gone to the doctor yesterday, maybe he wouldn't be dead today. And did you know he was planning to run for governor? So he would have been governor pension. He'd have outdone all of his ancestors. But, you know, it was his time. And then in that same chapter, they mentioned the legend that every night the ghosts of the pensions come out and they go to the picture frame and they poke around it. They're looking at it. You know, it's like they're still looking for the deed. They don't even know where the deed is. But they somehow are drawn to that picture frame and they're looking around. That's just of course, a legend. But what's interesting, the next day, when Uncle Venner shows up, Holgrave says he heard ghosts. I think he's joking. He doesn't believe in ghosts. But he says he heard the ghosts downstairs having a party. Of course, he probably, I don't know what he heard. But that's what he claimed. So, and the storm's over. As soon as the judge dies, that's one of the changes that happens. Again, it's how the author integrates the setting and the theme. Like, this evil has now been expiated. It's been, propitiated. It's been satisfied. It's over. It's done with. And so the chapter 19 is Alice's Posies. And I would just say that this chapter points out a lot of the changes that are now occurring because of the death of our man, the judge. Again, on the first page of that chapter, chapter 19, you just have to trust me on this. I didn't quote it. Well, I did quote it. I didn't put a page number. Page 198. It says the pension elm, which we saw on the first page of the book. Now we're practically, we will see on the last page of the book. Don't you love those bookends that you see? First page of the book, we hear about the elm. And then here we hear about it. It says the elm survived. What does the tree represent? It's a tree. And it's the family tree. Literally, it's the family tree. And then it represents the family's ancestors and everything. It survived except one branch. What do you think he's getting at right there? The tree survived, but one branch didn't. Who could the one branch be? The judge. Isn't that clever? And he also makes this comment, that one branch was like the golden branch that gained Aeneas. I don't know this story, Aeneas and the Sibyl. Do you know that one? You've read Aeneas. I've never really studied it, but it had gained Aeneas and Sibyl admittance into Hades. They had to have a golden branch to get into hell. That suggests that that's where the judge is. If anybody belonged there, I suppose you'd say he did. Okay, so the appearance, that same page, the appearance of the house has changed. Even the house, the weather's changed. Clifford has changed. The appearance of the house has changed. There was really an inviting aspect over the venerable edifice. Its windows gleamed cheerfully. Even the house became happier. Alice's posies, I'm lost count. There's 3 or 4 things already. Alice's posies are like blooming like crazy on the roof. The legend where she threw these seeds up there, they're from Italy, and that's why they're flowers on the roof. But they were just blooming like crazy, and the narrator made this comment: something within the house was consummated. Okay, what was consummated? What was ended? Was what?
The curse.
The curse is over. And then this other theme in this chapter, again, of the community, and it says the neighbors had been watching. They saw the two of them leave. The neighbors were watching. In that same chapter, it mentions that Ned shows up that morning. He wants some more cookies. He's asking for Phoebe, the baker, the butcher. They all show up at the house, just like they're regular things. So the contrast between the emptiness of the house, she's dead, he's dead. Outside, there's life. You know, there are people. There's life, there's people, there's community. They're all, I don't know how they figured it out, but they found out that the guy's dead. They didn't even go in. Nobody told them, but they figured out the judge is dead, and they think he's been murdered. So they're sharing this gossip. But it's that contrast of, on the outside, all this life. Remember, that's where Clifford and Hepzibah went. On the outside, in the inside, there's death. And this was an interesting comment on page 205. The Italian boy, he doesn't know anything about this. He's got his organ thing, going. He's turning it, and the monkey is, we saw him earlier. And he's entertaining in the midst of all this. And the narrator says, this contrast or mingling of tragedy with mirth happens daily, hourly, momently, 205. And that's just a fact. Right now somebody's in a hospital. Somebody's having a terrible accident. Here we have no idea. We're living our life. You're having a good day. But not everybody is, and that's the way life is. It's the mingling of happiness and tragedy. It's just fortunate we don't know all those tragedies, or we'd probably be depressed.
For the comparison about how the house was
Yeah.
happier, could you say how when Uncle Benner, when he was walking past it, that he heard the heart from Phoebe?
Very good. In fact, he's the first visitor. He's the first person that shows up that morning before these other people, the Ned and all these. I think it's interesting. I'm not sure I know why it's him, but I think it's interesting that it's Uncle Venner, because he's the happiest guy in the book. He might be a little off, you know what I mean? But he's happy. And so very good. Let's see. They call it the current of human life, so we talked about that. Phoebe returns. All right, chapter 20. We're almost done here. By the way, I keep saying there are 24 chapters. I got that right finally. I don't know why I had that in my head. There are 21 chapters. But, the flower of Eden. Holgrave lets Phoebe in, and don't you think it was odd? Where did he tell her he loved her? Yeah.
In the room right next to where the judge is at.
This dead body's over there, and he feels, man, this is, I can see him getting down on one knee. in the funeral home and asking Sally to marry him. Sally might not think that's a great idea. By the way, ladies, your fiance, it's a big deal now. You know how that is. You know, it's got to be a big production. Make sure the guy's the right guy. It doesn't really matter how fancy the production is. If it's the right guy, he can tell you over the phone. That's probably not a good idea either. But it doesn't have to be fancy. But here, it's in the middle of this death, this morgue. He's telling her that he loves her. And then he explains all the business about the judge framing, all that's in here. I don't know if you notice this. He says he was really depressed. There's a body in there, and he's really depressed about it, even though it's probably a good thing that the judge died. And Phoebe, he says, Phoebe saved him from that. So that's important. That was sort of it's an odd thing. This book's odd, but that's all that happens. Then he makes this statement. If you notice, Holgrave changes. And we'll note this in the last chapter too, but Holgrave has suddenly gone from a liberal to a conservative overnight. He's no longer about breaking down houses. He basically tells her he wants to settle down. He's the kind of guy that I'm not going to marry. Well, one girl's not enough for me, you know. I'm never going to have one girl. Not going to be enough. But all of a sudden, he's in love with this one girl, and he says he wants to settle down in a house. Remember, he's the guy who said, we don't need any more houses or even families. But love has changed him, and the events in the book changed him. And finally, in this next to last chapter, the very last part of the chapter points out that Alice's posies again are in full bloom. And so the flower of Eden has bloomed, likewise in this old dark house today. So just more emphasis in how things are better. And then finally, the last one, several things here. I used this word, if I can get it spelled right. Have you ever heard it? The word of the day, candidate. That is a great SAT word. You probably never see it, but you know what irrefragable means? He uses the word, Hawthorne does. He calls the evidence in favor of Clifford not having murdered his uncle irrefragable. It means indisputable. Cannot be disproven. New word, I like irrefragable. And, you know, we talked about the motivation that the judge had. He's the one, if anybody killed him, he didn't kill him. He didn't want to kill him. He was not a murderer, but what he did kill him. And what he did to Clifford deserves punishment. But page 220, Holgrave, we've talked about him changing. The narrator says, the foe of wealth and all manner of conservatism becomes wealthy. This guy that hated wealth, he hated anything conservative or established. He becomes wealthy. And he makes the comment to Phoebe that he wished that the judge's house was made of stone, like solid stone. And she laughs at him and says, a house of stone indeed. It is but 2 or 3 weeks ago that you seemed to wish people to live in something as fragile and temporary as a bird's nest. So it's kind of funny, kind of maybe unbelievable, but this guy has suddenly flipped overnight and is the conservative guy who wants to live in a stone house instead of, nowhere, like breaking houses down. And remember this picture of community, they're going out in the country. And I just made the point, Hawthorne actually spent several months at a utopian community called Brook Farm. And this sounds like what this is. This family is kind of an odd family. A brother and a sister, a cousin and her husband, and a neighbor are all going to be a family out in the country on a farm. And that sounds like a utopia type of situation. Oh, and I like this. I think being older than you, I can see the truth of this. I want to read this statement. One thing you'll learn as you read great literature is there's a lot of wisdom there. The greatest literature contains some of the greatest human wisdom that we have. But the narrator says this, Clifford's going to end well, right? Spent 30 years in jail unjustly, but now he's got it made. He's got his retirement made. He's with friends. Everything's right. But listen to this statement. It is a truth that no great mistake, whether acted or endured, in our mortal spheres is ever really set right. You ever thought of that? If somebody murders somebody important to you, you'll get over it. That person never coming back. That person go to jail for the rest of their life. They could execute the guy. It's not going to bring your loved one back. I think there's something sober and truthful about that. Even Job lost his family. He didn't get his family back. He got a new family. God didn't bring up those sons of his and daughter-in-laws. He didn't raise them from the dead. They're still dead. He got more sons and daughters-in-law, but you can't really replace the ones that had died, and that's just a fact. They'll see him in heaven. But I think that's really sobering. You can be forgiven, and God forgives you, and he wipes away the penalty. He forgets it in a way. But the thing still happened. That person's still hurt by something that you did or said or whatever I did or said. I think that's true. All right, let me finish this. You know where the deed was. Everybody know that? You don't need to be reminded of that. You know how it got there? How did the deed get in the recess behind the picture? Who put it there? Who built the house? Remember who built the house? The colonel paid for it, but he didn't build it. Who built the house? The son of Matthew Mall. Strangely enough, that doesn't make sense, but his father was killed by this guy essentially, and yet he builds the house. But before he left the house, he put the deed in the recess behind the picture. He hid it for all these years, and now it's worthless. In fact, when they open, there's a spring on the frame, and when it pops open, the whole picture falls to the ground, which is symbolic of what?
It's worthless.
Sure. And what else? The end of the curse. Absolutely. Remember Hephzibah, we can't touch it, because what would happen if we touched it, the legend said. Remember? The house would collapse. That was just a legend, and it doesn't, but that was what she was worried about. 2 reversals, and we'll basically be finished. I like reversals. Venner, who many people in town thought was a simpleton, there's something wrong. He thinks he's got a farm he's going to retire to. I don't think there's any farm. So maybe he's got Alzheimer's, I don't know. But it's considered by Phoebe and Clifford to be a wise philosopher. So, and he makes this comment. Venner compares his wisdom to, this is on page 223, golden dandelions, which never grow in the hot months, but may be seen glistening among the withered grass and under the dry leaves, and sometimes as late as December. He's comparing his wisdom to the beautiful flowers that don't grow in the manicured flower bed, but grow near a house, near some weeds, next to an ugly. That's where, and he said, you can have all the wisdom you want. I think that's neat. And this was one I've never really noticed. 2 neighbors are talking about Hephzibah, and everybody, as they leave, they get in a carriage and they're leaving. And one guy says this, my wife, she started a shop and lost $5. She had a shop for 3 years like Hephzibah. Hephzibah starts a shop. She's riding away right now at least $100,000, maybe $200,000, and he says maybe twice that much, maybe $400,000. I think that's really interesting. Maybe this will help you take note of, let me just point out that what is the most important event? What's the event that starts the whole book, really? Like, none of this would have happened if this didn't happen. What's the key event in this family's history? what the colonel did. Keep that in mind as you think about, as you pull your ideas together. Why is that so important? Like, why did it have such an impact? And so be prepared to write tomorrow. We'll see. I know you got to go, I guess. Is it time to go? Hang on. It's time. See ya.